privacy sandbox is really allowing people to have control on their end. Let's call it locally. Locally means native to the device that's sitting in front of me, whether I'm on an iMac, PC, smartphone, whatever, to control how I am distributed in my likeness, what people can discover around me. I think when you start getting in it, you start looking at all the facets and feature of it, from identity storage to partitioning of identity, to what degree it can be shared and moved around. You start looking at the levels of your credentials built around your identity, and that gets into the depth of who you are.
Welcome to the Pubway podcast. Each episode will showcase a conversation with a leader from the publishing world. If you're working at a publisher, a DSP or SSP, or you're just curious about the media industry and want to sit down and pick the brains of the experts from within the publishing space, then this is the show for you. Hello, and welcome to the Pubway podcast. My name is Iannacchino.
And I'm Mike Villalobos. And in today's episode, we have actually a really good one here. We're going to be covering quite a few different topics. The first one being first-party data, privacy sandbox, and how publishers are building their business stacks and their tech stacks.
Absolutely. And it's my absolute pleasure to introduce Albert Thompson, the Managing Director of Digital at Walton Isaacson. And we were even chatting a bit before about how I was trying to find your 140 Twitter character bio, but it seems a little bit hard to do. So I'd love for you to introduce yourself to the audience a bit more.
Yeah, absolutely. First of all, thanks for having me on the podcast. I love the 1, 2, 3.
Got to snap on eventually.
Right. So, I mean, look, I've been in the digital space over a quarter of a century. I almost hate saying that number. So I've had the benefit of watching everything that matters in this day and age be built. You know, being in the social media space since the blogosphere, you know, doing search with Alta Vista and Lycos and Excited Home long before Google, watching the ascent, watching the term programmatic actually.
Did you say Lycos, like Lycos Go Get It, the old school commercial?
Yeah. Yeah.
Our ages are showing.
Yeah, they are.
all these relics, mama.com. I remember when the portal deal phrase was being formed, and that was like what you were doing in digital. So it's amazing to watch the evolution of these things, but it's also in the same time watch human nature not do much different other than having better tools and better platforms to play with. So yeah, I'm a practitioner. I kind of tell people I'm more of a marketing technologist. What I mean by that is backgrounds in marketing, focus on consumer. All I'm trying to understand is how technology solves business and marketing challenges. That's really it for me in its simplicity. I try to keep it rather binary and not use a lot of the industry terms and jargon, which obviously we're going to break through in this podcast. But pleasure to be on the show.
When keeping it binary, what do you mean by that? Just, I guess, what's your lens on keeping it simple in that sense?
Yeah, I mean, look, if you're going to have philosophies around things, you have to keep them very straight and very direct. What I mean by that, when I say the challenge is how technology is going to solve, a marketing challenge, a business challenge, you look at the business problem and you figure out how technology can mitigate it, or is it something that needs to accelerate? Does it need to collapse? Does it need to give you line of sight? You keep it very simple. What I find when I go to industry talk tracks and conferences is people use this language nobody understands. It's like watching an episode of Suits unfold in a conference. It's like, yeah, but you ain't the Harvey Specter of this thing. You know what I'm saying? It's like, no one knows what you're saying. They'll tell you, like in a court of law, the average jury does not know any industry of any plaintiff that comes in the room. You have to use fourth grade language. And I think that's the problem in digital is people use a language that no one understands, largely to build a moat around an opportunity. But at some point, clients can't put money in a marketplace because they don't understand what you're saying. And that happened in the whole enterprise website business where people spending millions of dollars on websites and they're like, we didn't know what the hell they were saying, so we just dropped $1 million. Like, well, you can Wix that thing for free today. So what are we talking about? That's the biggest challenge just in the discipline is not simplifying it in binary terms. It's kind of like, look, if you want to stay in shape, train like a boxer because none of them are fat. That's the binary aspect of it, right? People don't have these simple premises that rule everything to make it very straightforward. And that's why people get, as they say, lost in the sauce. Because, you eat that like, what are you talking about, bro? Like, where are we going with this here? And I think I've tried to reach people where they are to then find a way to move them to an elevated place within the space. And that's always been my
Absolutely. And I mean, yeah, we all know there's no shortage of acronyms in this space. It's
Alphabet
very
soup, as you call
easy
it.
to get lost in the sauce. And I love that. I've always approached a lot of things like explain it to me like I'm in
right.
kindergarten. That's the best way to reach most people. And I think that's a great segue into our first question. Obviously, with third-party cookie deprecation, while it was pushed, we know it's inevitable. And a lot of people are now taking a closer look at their first-party data strategies. And being that that's Pubway, I would love to maybe approach this more from the publisher angle, being that you've kind of worked across the ad ecosystem throughout your career, and how specifically first party data can really help publishers and to help their brands really succeed moving forward. It'd be great to hear your perspective.
Absolutely. I mean, look, people need to understand what cookie data was really about because it never had robust consumer information. If you're a consumer marketer, you already know cookie information was limited in understanding personas and profiles. Cookie data helped validate the idea that an individual hit a page to justify page views to basically put in a media kit to sell it a CPM rate card. That was the basis of a cookie. Yes, there's some other things related to tracking and movement across the site. But I mean, when you really get down to it, if you want to understand user flow across the site, you got to be looking at Google Analytics. You got to be looking at Adobe Suite or Omniture back in the day. So it's funny that we're at this Y2K of digital advertising because of creation. And it's like, yeah, but it was never the solve anyway. So I think when publishers look at it in looking at solutions beyond, they need to fix the solve they never did in the beginning. What does a marketer want? A consumer to buy their stuff. And they want high intent audiences. Cookie data was never really had the ability to identify high intent audiences. I have to remind our partners every day, whether they run a TV network or a website. Like my clients, they make a car, they make candy, they got a hardware store, they sell French fries. They don't make TV shows and websites, even though they may have a website. So at the end of the day, what information are you unpacking related to your audience that gives them high intent confidence that you can reach the person who's going to move to their retail storefront? My thing is, if you're going to look at solutions post cookies, because you didn't do it pre cookie and during the cookie era, you need to solve what a marketer's trying to do. A marketer's trying to find people who have intent to show up to buy their stuff to push revenue. So the solutions have to be more than just page counting. In the idea of user session tracking, they need to get into deeper profiles of consumer behavior that can be properly monetized and distributed back to a brand who is not in your business to essentially figure out how they can accelerate their business. The problem is you got a lot of publishers who are in the B2B business. They're not in the B2B to C business. And that's folly. And look, the where things are going in rewarding premium sites and people who have, walled garden and data clean rooms. I love all these terminology. They mean nothing to most people. Is that they're coming up with ways to insulate and create more money and push it up the funnel. But at the end of the day, you need to look a marketer in the eye and say, what are you chasing? What are you pursuing? Consumer profile type, revenue type, and understanding of the consumer. Because I'm one of these people that believes that media needs to do more than deliver impressions. It needs to teach you about someone you're pursuing. Most publishers teach nothing about the consumer the publisher is pursuing. So the collective level of solutions needs to do that above all else. And what you find is that publishers are getting just lost in their own business model and getting immersed in the client's market challenge.
That's a really good point. And I think back to what you mentioned about just the consumer in general, how do you actually gain the trust of the consumer to give consent to their data or to actually allow them to track them through that bypath or that workflow, right? Because I think as of today, people are denying those cookies all day long. So, right. And but there's a trusting point. Like if I go to say an e-marketer or whatever publisher I read quite often, I'm going to give them my consent because I want to make sure that things are tailored and relevant to me and what I'm actually reading. So how do you gain that trust from a publisher lens?
Yeah, it's a great question. I mean, look, I think what you have to do is you have to act like you have dimensionalized understanding of the identity of the users that come to your platforms relative to the category your clients are in. I don't care if it's in finance, I don't care if it's beauty and health. People need to stop acting like they have everyone. Here's what everyone's doing. We're a shopping mall. Everybody goes there. So we can help you discover them and find them and report out on them. Instead of looking at it in terms of, okay, we're going to create segment intelligence for your category because you as JP Morgan or Bank of America need to understand people's willing to invest or open a checking account. So we're going to understand and develop intent audiences for your vertical to share back with you. And then you start getting clients that says, okay, you're now organizing a consumer marketplace in the way that in the language we speak, we can now put more money in. And that is essentially
Right.
what's happening. Unfortunately, publishers are too self-centered. They're thinking about their
Mhm.
editorial, their content model, what they're going to release, the ego of the competitive nature that they write better stories than the person next to them. Not understanding, look, you make all your money less through subscriptions for most of the populace, other than Wall Street Journal, New York Times, through monetizing content back through advertising. So you need these brands to support your business, to write it off. So it's prudent of you to understand and spend time with, well, who are you pursuing? What do they look like? What kind of decisioning is this evolving? And then find new discovery audiences for them. Like, hey, you never looked at this consumer type, but you should now be looking at this consumer type based on what we've now discovered for you and try to pull them up into the enterprise. Because every client is in one business for certain. The idea of replenishing a pipeline, and it is a pipeline of customers that age out, customers that defect. I just don't think the average publisher speaks the marketing language. Here's what I always tell people. Marketing is the parent company. That's the frame. Media, advertising, promotions, events, experiential, supply chain, distribution, wholesale, retail, all under one parent company called marketing. And what it is, people act like they're independent of that, but it's like, no, but they're the reason you exist. And that's why I believe in having a marketer's mindset first and foremost, because you just get more respect in the game. And the other thing I see is I don't see enough marketers as they say, putting publishers on game, as they say. Let me educate you on how this works and how we work. And if you can answer the call, we will put money into you. It's like investors. Organize the opportunity so we can put money in. Clients need to, publishers need to treat clients like, are they angel funding, very early stage, Series A, Series B, boom, boom, boom. We're going to go public with stock trading. So then it looks like a valuable piece of real estate that keeps gaining volume and velocity. And then more brands will be putting more money into it. They don't approach it based on the rules of engagement that the marketplace is telling them.
Fair play.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think the consent piece is super interesting because, like, Mike, we're in the industry, so we understand the ethos behind clicking that accept button, but the average consumer does not.
Right.
And I also find it funny that it's us and drug dealers who use the words consumers or users. That's like,
you're not wrong.
It's,
I gotta call that out the next time I'm on.
No, it's I stole it from Rob Beeler and his Beeler Tech events. He usually drops that every once in a while, and I always remember that when we're talking about anything marketing wise. But I think with the decline of cookies and the growing emphasis on user privacy for advertisers, though, on this side of the coin, how can they better adopt to leverage these first party data strategies to help them continue to evolve their campaigns while maintaining compliance and regulations for their users?
Well, the first thing I would start with is setting the frame on audiences and consumers, because you kind of need four. Yeah. Okay, you have the first party audience. That is the one should be your core customer. Okay, you have the marketplace audiences, call it third party. And this could be competitive, like this brand has that consumer, I want them. But that's easy. Then you have the discovery audiences. Who should you be thinking about that isn't part of the wheelhouse of the foundation, but you probably should pursue, especially if it's like, let's say, an emerging demographic, like a multicultural audience, or let's say it's Generation Alpha that you're planning for. Then you're going to have the dynamic audiences. These are the people who show up. They don't fit the persona, they don't fit the profile, but there was some emotional trigger that put them on frame and end up buying your stuff. When you start to look at that, then you go to partners, and then you have the zero party audience. So let's say 5, fully consent based. This is what's going to make the inroads in 2024. And these are people who are hand raised and say, market to me. It's all good. You can use my information because in a Web3 area, I'll be getting checks paid on my data being sold. Then you start to go to partners and say, well, of the spectrum of the 5, what can you give us? What can you get us? And I think that starts to develop, okay, well, what kind of relationship are we going to have with you in the marketplace? Which of the 5 of those boxes can you tick? Because then I have to find the configuration of who's going to get the remainder of it, and then who has the overlap, et cetera, et cetera. Then you start getting into, okay, how are you identifying these people beyond cookie data? Are you using search intent data? Are you using in-app SDK data? Are you using behavioral data, a combination of universal ID data? What are you provisioning able to access via LiveRamp? We live in a world of where metadata is king, but no one talks about it. And the whole idea of metadata is just the intimacy of all the little bits in code that teaches something and culminate to a bigger picture. I'm also a big third-party data signal. There's no stack. I don't care if it's a DSP or a publisher that has all the inputs you need to understand. Just think about the complexity of a human identity. Let's think about all the things a consumer will never declare. They're never going to tell you. Okay. So you read it through body language, and this is why it's great that computer vision is making its way to the business. The whole idea of layering on data signals is to get back signals a consumer didn't want to declare, but because you were watching them, you now have information around them that starts to dimensionalize who they are. This is well beyond cookie capability and user session and cache data. Remember, they clear your cache there, right? So it's like now you start to look at it, the complexity. Then you start to look at, okay, do you have AI code on page? Because now we need deep learning, line of sight that some of the other signals can't pick up. That now deep learning can now pull into to give you more accelerated understanding of what you're doing. Once you get through that, you're like, okay, we know what the model now needs to be. It's complex, very. And there are a series of things that we need to turn on. And as an advertiser, you got to look at publisher partners who have a series of those things turned on. If they are one or two dimension, you already know that they have limited line of sight of trying to teach you about the consumer you are pursuing. If you know they have a series of variables turned on, or you know that they will be effectively robust. I think we just don't have people qualifying in a basic human psychology capacity that human beings are complex. And I need you to teach me as many things as possible about them that I can't learn through traditional means, or that I can only learn through doing ethnographies, which you can't really scale. There's no measuring stick. There's no North Star. So you took ethnography as the North Star. Then you say we need all these data layers to get as close to that as possible. We'll never be one to one, but as close as possible. Now we can be taught as much as possible about who we're trying to monetize for long-term customer value.
Going back to the deep learning and the computer science aspect of it, as these models start getting built out and publishers are starting to build their own learnings from their first party data, I have a should and how question. Should they monetize that data and produce that, provide that for the advertiser, right? And then how would you envision that being best put in practice in place? Would it be installing it into the DSP as a tile, say through the trade desk, or would it be more direct, or would it be running through a clean room? And I mean, again, a myriad of options here, but I'd love to hear your thoughts on should they and how would they?
All of the above. And the first thing I'd say is this whole notion in the marketplace of clients don't want to pay for first party data is the most ridiculous thing I've ever heard. There's no intelligence in this world that is free. It's why the military spends so much money. It's not a warring business. We're not building ships to go blow someone up. We are trying to gather intelligence for positioning, lobbying, and leverage. The world is very much about intelligence. So you start to think about the idea that there is a cost for it, and it is a premium cost, not a free cost. When I look at that, if a brand's viability is shareholder value and increasing profitability and revenue, there is a price for doing so, for which a lot of advertising is wasted money, but intelligence is heavily underserved because people don't want to pay for it because they've been conditioned to think it's actually free. Nothing is free. So I would be monetizing back, because if I'm going to help you build a model around your consumer that increases long-term customer value, that keeps your stock going and your share price and profitability and these executives paid, you're going to pay for that. What are we talking about? Why would I ever give that away for free? And even if I say it's for free, I'm going to find a way to write it back into whatever I am charging for. So I mean,
if it's free, you're probably the product. If it's free,
dude, you said it. Like, if you're not paying for the product, you are the product.
You are the product.
So let's just lay that out there. I think people need to properly educate and set the frame to clients that this costs. Do I think publishers should monetize that back in a way? If they have real intelligence that is worth something in the marketplace, absolutely. If they're in the business of sharing intel and IP so that other people can use it. I mean, look, the difference between a T-Mobile and a Verizon Media Services is T-Mobile position themselves as a data company. Verizon Media position themselves as a content company. We saw where that landed. Okay, so you want to understand the most powerful companies and entities in the world are in the data intelligence and ownership business, not on the other side of the business. So I think when you start to understand that, what you want is a reciprocal relationship. The only thing I've heard inconclusive with data clean rooms is that they have been inconclusive. I asked the question, when will data clean rooms be ready for multicultural? Someone at a pretty notable media company with a pretty notable Fortune 50 brand says, forget about it, 2-3 years from now. So what's the point? I mean, and look, when I gave you the manual way of understanding consumer intelligence, people don't want to do it because it's work. If you did it the manual way, we'd already be in the game. You don't need a data clean. When I look at a data clean room, other than ensuring that information doesn't leak, which I respect, and some of that you can just handle with really thick legal contracts. My whole thing is you don't need a data clean room if you manually bolt on a series of signals that give you precision around who your audiences are. The fear everyone has is this idea of anti-scale. When we lay this on, it's not scalable. What do you mean scalable? The average brand's margins for growth are 3 to 5%. A Procter & Gamble only needs 3 to 5% a year. Okay, there's no such thing as 100%. They call it fixed operations in manufacturing because the plant can't triple, double what it's making. It's called fixed operations. So it can only handle 20, 30% growth a year anyway. So what are we talking about? So the real number is a small number. It is not a scale of masse number. And that's the other thing that people need to sort of get over in their understanding. So when you look at the precision of understanding, you want precision in understanding to model out. You know, when they do concept testing of a car, they don't get the opinion of 100,000 people. They get it of a few key people who understand design, symmetry, aerodynamics, consumer appeal, that is a representative factor of the masses who will then buy that. That is the model. It is always the model. Human nature has always been that model. You don't get to convince 10 million people on the same day. It always starts with a small group of early adopters or innovators who then move to a bigger group. And that's the trend adoption curve that we talked about. But the consumer adoption is the same. The consumer proxy and intelligence curve is the same. Everything starts small. We're just in a world where everyone wants everything so colossal and big. But nothing could be further from the truth. And that is why understanding intelligence needs to be at a smaller audience or data layer.
That's fair. Just being more intentional with the usage of data and also the application of it. Yeah.
Yep. Totally. And I guess that also is a good segue into, for this first party data, kind of the best approaches when you're thinking about responsibility and ethics. It's a bit of a loaded gun, I'm sorry, but I think it's definitely something as state legislature, obviously in the US, is constantly changing. I think there's now 12 or 13 states probably imparting some sort of privacy and user consent into a government level.
And all very different.
Yeah, and all extremely different. Who's going to keep track of it? Everyone in this room right now. No pressure. But I guess it would be great to understand kind of best practices as you're approaching those conversations for a publisher.
It's a very interesting question. And the reason why I like it is I spoke at AdMonster's data and privacy conference about a year ago, and my pitch was on the misuse of third-party data. The idea that most publishers or brands have on their website a privacy policy, which kind of says, we won't abuse the you-know-what out of you, but we are going to kind of prostitute your information. Then you start looking at the legislation that says, hey, without fully consent, you can't run in these particular states. Look, the industry has been skating on thin ice in the usage of consumer information, largely because advertising does have some utility, in particular to the consumer, just to know that products and stuff exist. I think what people want is a better relationship with advertising. Like, speak to me, speak when spoken to. And if I'm speaking to you, now speak back to me. What they don't want is bombarded. But people understand the purpose of advertising, in particular that, the service I'm consuming content against is free because ads are running around it. People are starting to understand the populace, that particular model. But that's not going to hold forever. When you start looking at updates to browsers that allow you to turn off cookies, the same thing with in-app tracking, for which everything has to be permissioned. Obviously, the Web3 universe is very much almost a double opt-in type of environment. Then you start to understand that advertising is going to have purpose. It's going to have meaning. It's going to have consent. What I've not seen is people preparing for the inevitable. You almost have to have a fully consent model that you're testing in the background. You may not have to activate and turn it on today, but you do need to be prepared, because I think a lot of publishers will be upside down if we flip tomorrow night. My statement to the publishers in the room, and look, they were some of the most notable ones in the United States. I was like, look, I know how I'm going to make my first $1 million off you guys. I'm going to send you all a letter about how you're misusing information. We're going to settle out of court, 50,000 a pop, and I'll get my first $1 million, because none of you want the smoke. Now, of course, the room was dead quiet, but I was dead serious. Like, that is where you are. You look at the Oracle lawsuit You look at the Sephora. Sephora's positioning was, well, we didn't really touch it, so we're not really liable. And the court was like, no, no, no. You were able to exploit it for measure, for gain, strategically to bring people to your store. So there's a great line. I think the biggest folly is we have to get legal counsel at seat at the table. And look, you want to bring lawyers to the conferences. I get it, but you got to bring them in the room to understand the dynamics, what's going on, so you can manage against, well, what is our solve and what is our plan B? And what I see constantly is people just aren't bringing legal into the conversation. I just feel that lawyers are going to shut things down, but you have to give them a seat at the table to understand where the level of risk really is. Where are you most vulnerable? Where does a sales team not have line of sight in the letter of the law, and bring people who do, to come up with policy and governance that can protect the enterprise. That's the main thing that I don't see, is not connecting the dots. And look, half the reason is that the jargon at the average ad tech conference is like legalese, but it's a different language of legalese. It's not French, it's not German. So you don't have to educate lawyers. I mean, look, the whole issue with block lists for through Double Verify and IS is that they were written by legal people who don't participate in culture. So you have to bring legal people and help them understand what is now part of culture. You can't block the word revolt anymore, because Revolt is now a media platform with one of our partners we work with, for which the word revolt was on the block list, and we're trying to run an ad campaign on the website. You know, these are the things that still exist. So when you start to look at small follies like that, you can imagine when you get to uses of data, they're even bigger in terms of the egregious nature of what the industry has gotten away with. But people are going to have to start getting a lot smarter about bringing people to the table who can create new forms of policy that protect everyone.
Absolutely. And I mean, I think I even read recently, I think it was a UK publisher. I don't remember if it was maybe Reach or Future, but they were hiring some sort of like chief identity or consent officer to kind of help with this conversation, to put somebody in a position of power to kind of speak to both lines, the sales side and the legalese side. So I'm not sure if they've already been hired or it's the job posting is just up, but I think it's a good step in the right direction. And I'm sure, I think everyone's waiting to see like how that actually shapes out.
Yeah. You've heard rumblings of the idea of hiring a data czar or a privacy czar, you know, and look, at the end of the day, I don't know. Look, the problem is law, government entities have always been struggling with the speed of information, the speed of the consumer, and the speed of technology and the platforms. And they're not going to catch up independent themselves. We have to bring them along and seat them on the high-speed train. We can't expect their little caboose to catch up. And that's the problem. And part of it is we don't want them in the sandbox, even though tech companies spend a lot of time lobbying in their sandbox. But I think we're just on the precipice in which we have to bring them to the fore to understand what all these technologies are essentially going to do. Just because artificial intelligence is almost going to weaponize the idea of data intelligence about everything and everyone. Once any entity can build a large language model with very little restriction around information, everything will be number crunching with these large models against large data sets. The other thing we have to look at is the source of these data sets, because some of them aren't accurate. And particularly when you get into anything culture, you realize that they're not leveraging data sets that have anything to do with culture. That are on the precipice of culture, that are participate in culture. So a lot of these AI-powered engines from, ChatGPT, Perplexity, Latimer, don't have real cultural acumen and cultural intelligence. And look, I mean culture.
I do think I think eventually it'll get there, right? Because you're 100% right. The model's so nascent at the moment, but I think in the next 10 years and the processing power that it possesses, I think it could be a factor in the next, again, 5 to 10 years. But really quickly, you mentioned not just the sandbox aspect. Let's talk about Google Sandbox. Because I feel like you've been part of those conversations for a while now. And I really want to pick your brain here, because this is, while it is another can kick down the road, up to 2025 now, probably. We'll see what happens. What do you think about the Google Sandbox? Let's explain to the listeners, what is a Google Sandbox? And then how do you think that's going to impact the advertising ecosystem if and when it does roll out?
Back to the kindergarten approach.
I mean, look, I think the first thing is Google, as they sunset the industry and set this Y2K of digital motion, had to have a pretty robust solution as a solve, which you could only culminate into a sandbox, which may be a prettier word than people saying a dumpster fire of stuff. Because you're going to have to sort through what it is in technical terms that it's going to. I mean, look, the whole idea of phasing out third-party cookies is, what is the solve? When you start looking at the amount of cross-site tracking, cross-device tracking, having the uses of an API that is more browser controlled, i.e., allows for user controlled, so users aren't handcuffed to the industry in terms of what they have to tolerate. They have more a way of protecting their own identity. There's a notion of the distributed me, and that means that we are all individually highly distributed there. We're on multiple social platforms. We use multiple search engines, browsers. So our identity of who we are is kind of everywhere. We have to get to a place where we can manage who we are through one dashboard and one view. We're not there yet. But what you're finding is that at all our points of exposure, there will be tools for which we can protect ourselves and protect our identity, or share it to the degree that we believe in the promise of marketing and advertising. We want to be spoken to by brands. And I think that's the biggest thing with the privacy sandbox, is really allowing people to have control on their end. Let's call it locally. Okay, and locally means native to the device that's sitting in front of me, whether I'm on an iMac, PC, smartphone, whatever, to control how I am distributed in my likeness, what people can discover around me. Look, that's the basic premise, and that's very smart. I think when you start getting in it, you start looking at all the facets and feature of it, from identity storage to partitioning of identity, to what degree it can be shared and moved around. You start looking at the levels of your credentials built around your identity, and that gets into the depth of who you are. Because look, we all got multiple email accounts. We're on multiple platforms, and some we have a different identity on all those different platforms. I mean, who I am on Facebook is different than Instagram, is different than Snap, is different than YouTube. So I think when you start to understand that, then you say, okay, well, there's got to be a pretty robust feature set that allows us as users to control, from how much data to ad exposures that I have to see. Because look, we're seeing how many ads a day, 20,000, how much it is. It's a crazy number. So this is all part of the what's built into the sandbox. I mean, there's some other things in there that, acronym I want to break down for this particular podcast, but I think a lot of it comes back to the basic notion of protection. I think the federal government has laid in that users need to be able to protect themselves from you people who like to exploit their data and information. The reality is, there's part of the populace that's okay with it, as long as it's not abused, as long as they don't get too much credit card fraud, they don't get their identity stolen and hacked. People are okay with being hit with ads that ain't really for them. We figured out how to tune it out. We just hold up our phone and do this. Okay? And then, is it over? Okay, I'm back. So I think the human nature has had its way of being able to block out the noise. But I think they had to offer a robust tool set. And look, let's be clear. Some of this is the model for the industry. It's not just about what Google via Chrome is offering. It is what Safari needs to look at. It's some of the things that Firefox would say was already doing. It's stuff that Brave already has in place. So there's some browser types that are already ahead in the business. The thing is, they have a small percentage of the market share. So Google does have the second, third mover advantage of adopting a lot of the principles that it can study that's seen work with other players, Brave and Firefox notwithstanding, to put together the best use case around that. The other thing is, when you start looking at it from a tech stack, things are built on Google tech stack. So you want to have those feature sets that could ladder up into text and to add tech stacks as well as from a publisher suite, because a lot of the publishers use Google Analytics, not so much the Adobe. I think Adobe is more brand side, where Google Analytics is publisher side. So look, they have an entire ecosystem. And then as a player in the streaming business, with YouTube TV, they have to set a model for that as well, because of what platforms like your Hulus, your Netflix world weren't tracking, or are tracking, or should not be tracking moving forward. So they had to really, characterize the North Star of what the industry needs to look at in terms of best practices and options. And look, I think there will be replicas of their model, where someone says, we're not doing all that. You could see in Amazon, we're going to have our own tool set, but we're going to be respectful of that. The things based on our stack and our API, those are things that we'll be creating as part of the solution that we feel like it's going to make sense based on our business model.
Fair. I think it's fair to say that a lot of the larger players that are within the Google ecosystem are not safe, but they have enough cushion to figure it out, right? On monetization with the deprecation. Do you think the smaller publishers, because we're talking about culture, right? And I think culture also always lies within the more not nooks and crannies, but the nuance of understanding of who your audience is. Do you think the smaller publishers will have a tougher time with this adoption? What's that impact, do you think? What does that look like? And how do you protect against that?
It's a great question. I mean, look, I think because it's Google, a lot of the stuff is off the shelf. It has enterprise capability, but early stage small business pricing and adoption and application. Some of the other analytic suites are just far more complex and have an enterprise price tag. Let's be clear. Where I think Google has always been in the long tail. You can spend $10 million a month on Google search, or you can run an ad for $50. That's always been the model. So I think the adoption will be a lot more palatable. Here's the thing: the gap is not about. It's about understanding the marketplace rules and what big brands expect as expectations. Cookies were so universal that you could be a nascent site with 50,000 uniques or the one with, a billion page views and the application was the same. When you start looking at the complexity of the sandbox, some of these smaller enterprises don't have the developer types to implement the entire roadmap of the sandbox. That's going to be their challenge, just the lack of sophistication and resourcing for implementation. And some of the line of sight of the bigger brand conversations or what expectations are from a brand that they would still run advertising on your domains. That's going to be the, and look, I want to be very direct about this. We're seeing this happen in digital where things are pushing up to the top and premium is being rewarded first and foremost. Whereas the middleware is like a long tail that could get essentially to a degree left behind. I don't think that's an accident. Google's not necessarily playing that game. But when you look at some of the other big tenants in the space, that's what you see. There's a lot of talk amongst premium, top tier entities and what their solve is. And it's like, yeah, but you guys are only rewarding you boys. You're not anyone else. I think that's where the potential fallout is. Here's the real fallout, though. We don't make decisioning in premium. You and I don't live at Saks and Nordstrom. Wish we could. We don't live at Tiffany's and Louis Vuitton. You know where we live? 7-Eleven. You know.
Shout out Blow Pop.
Live in gas station. If I gotta get this fixed every single week, I gotta go to 7-Eleven and gas station. Let's just be clear. I gotta go to Walmart. I gotta go to Target. I gotta go. Women go to the nail salon. We don't live in premium. We live in the mid range, lower tier, which is the long tail. So digital is rewarding premium. Your Saks and Nordstroms, your Ocean Primes of the world, which we cannot spend our time in. And they're not looking at the populace and where we make decisions that are smaller domains. Like if I'm going to make a hair care decision, I'm not going on a mainstream site with, 500 million uniques. I'm on a site that's probably got 50,000 uniques because all I want to hear from is dudes that have the same hair I do. That's it. And that's the population who's actually talking about it. So I think the danger where digital is going is rewarding the premium, which is where consumers make choices. Consumers have always made choices in the long tail. That has never changed. It will never change. We can't afford to live up here all day long. It's why there's so many of us at Chick-fil-A in a drive-through or Chipotle, and we're not at Ruth Chris every other day. What are we talking about? So you have to bring that part of the populace along of platforms because that is how we make our real consumer intimate choices. And that, I think, is the folly that I see that people are negating because it's unpopular to care about them.
Absolutely. And I feel like, too, that just the vague definition of what is premium these days, it really varies depending on who you're speaking to, because you could check off every single box on someone's premium list and you still are not because you fall into like the small to mid-sized business portion, more of the mid to long tail. I mean, look at any of the Google certified publishing partners out there who represent hundreds of thousands of these creators and websites and businesses like the Freestars, Raptives, Mediavine, She Medias, etc. Like they're in a great place to help protect and aggregate all of those players. And being that it's associated with Google, you would think there'd be certain protections or prioritization in place. But you do bring up a good point that those premium brands, the more ComScore top 20 media companies in whatever vertical, they're still getting prioritized for those dollars, even with all of those protections already existing.
Well, here's the thing. And I appreciate what you said about premium means different things. And this is not my quote, but I love it. This was from Sam Harris. He said, attention is the cash value of your time. Like where you give your attention, you should get the most financial reward back from. And his thing was like, time is the only true measure of your wealth other than. And when you start to look at it, a younger generation, Gen Z, Gen Alpha, and degree younger millennials are like, premium is where I put my most coveted time. It could be a hike, a walk, going on a cruise. It doesn't even have to cost real money. It could be this amazing find at a thrift store. And the older generation of marketers, largely still decision makers or boomers and older Gen Xers, still look at premium as the European model, that which is scarce, but that which is scarce as a commoditized product. So Louis Vuitton, Ferrari, Lamborghini, Pagani, Aston Martin all play the scarce model. That's why they introduce these products and cars. Oh, that's only 10 of them. Well, they don't look at this store. Because the idea is like you have to get it now or it'll be gone forever, or you get in the resale market for 3 times that. The American model is very much overabundance. Everyone should have a Coca-Cola. Everyone. The homeless person on the street should be able to get one, and so does the billionaire. But when you start looking at the shift of scarcity around time, well, everyone has a level of scarcity in their time, but they can easily identify the things that if they had, one coveted hour, who and what they would give it to. And that becomes the definition of premium. And when you look at that, the scary aspect about that changes the dominance hierarchy. That means that publishers have been sit in the top, end up in the middle. And ones that are nascent at the bottom would literally be at the top. And that doesn't sit well because the lack of sitting atop the dominance hierarchy means you get less attention, less influence, less the ability to monetize. So the whole idea of maintaining a foothold on attention for the sake of influence is you have the spoils of riches of making the most money. You're basically Miami beachfront, not Jersey Shore. But now people find value in whatever shore they can get to, and they will decide if that is their ideal beachfront based on silly variables like, can I swim? Do I even get in the water? How long is the sand? Because the sand in Huntington Beach is way longer than Miami Beach, but the water's 40 degrees difference. So, but again, all this is changing and evolving where we have to reestablish the idea. And it's up to the consumer and brands to really tell the publisher population what is now the new normal of premium or luxury, because it's not what it was once before.
Absolutely. And I really think you hit on a good point where it's truly we're all just buying time or we're selling time at the end of the day. It's really all what we're doing.
There are a lot of people who are effectively on borrowed time. Like I've said that. I think same comment.
I apologize.
A lot of people on borrowed time. And that's the main thing that people don't realize.
Absolutely. Well, I mean, I feel like we could keep going on this for days and days, but I would think I would love to kind of wrap up our conversation and have a bit more personal. Since clearly you've been around the block a few times, I'd love to know, what are you reading right now? What's on your bookshelf? What's exciting outside of our industry, or maybe it's within our industry, which is completely fine.
It's interesting. I would say in the recent 2 years, and I use this analogy, like if you want to learn about politics, you don't watch CNN. You need to study politics, and you probably should start with lobbying as a discipline. I've gotten to a place where I'm more interested in hearing from clinical psychologists talking about human behavior than reading advertising trades. And it's not to say that I don't read for the idea of understanding headlines, where things are moving, and seeing some breakthroughs. But I'm always trying to understand why people do the things they do. And I think that's what, if people understood that, aside from the world being in a better place, advertising marketing would absolutely be in a place. It's been a long time since the average marketer looked the consumer in the eye and understood who they are and why they do what they do and buy what they buy. People spend so much time in meetings, as Gary Vayner would say, the audacity of the boardroom, instead of operating in a high-touch environment to let the consumer touch the product and touch you. So there's value exchange. Human beings get most excited hearing other people's stories. And consumer marketing is a game of ambition. And part of the ambition is hearing the stories of people and the why to orient and build and design products for them or better oriented around them. I think that's a bit of a lost art. I think one of my favorite books that I've sort of reread is Mavericks at Work, because I think we're in an era where most of the Mavericks are gone. We don't have enough Richard Bransons running the planet to disrupt the status quo. We have a lot of people doing what the human brain does most naturally, doing what's most popular and doing what it did yesterday. We don't have enough people willing to disrupt their own thinking. And that's something I've never been afraid of personally. It's just sunsetting something I literally said last week. Like, oh, it's changed, it's moved, it's here now. So this is where we're at. I think people have been in such a pursuit to get comfortable In this business, the consumer is not going to allow you to get comfortable. Technology is not going to allow you to get comfortable. So people have to have this innate intellectual curiosity. And I think that's one of the other things that's just fairly lacking in the business.
Awesome.
I love that. Honestly, love that.
I love that we're ending with that.
I was like, man, now I got to think about myself real quick. And
I know.
what did I do yesterday? That could be detrimental tomorrow. I don't know.
Deep reflection time.
Seriously, I was going through a therapy session.
Dude, hey, I'm not mad at anybody brushing your teeth, but look, you get to a point where it's like, man, I got to rethink this toothpaste. I mean, like, you got to be willing to look. The whole idea of incrementality, there's truth in it. Like, I would tell my kids, like, if you get this much better every day, imagine where you'd be in 10 years. And I would tell one of my daughters who still plays soccer,
mom mentality.
Like, if you actually out train every day, you will surpass everyone, because no one's going to train for 10 years straight.
Yeah, just the compounding effect.
Absolutely. Yeah. Well, amazing. Yeah. I mean, this has been wonderful. Thank you so much. And I can't let you go without a poster reference, but I think we're bad boys for life now after this conversation.
No, Bad Boys 4 is coming out as well.
Yeah. I know.
I mean, I was looking, I was like, Bad Boy 1, 2, 3 in the back. I was like, wait, you got to be Mike for 4. Well, Albert, thanks again for the time. Actually, funny enough, Albert and I have known each other. Well, my first year in advertising, I met Albert. I pitched him when I was a sales rep. I think it was like 2012, maybe. Wow. And then I hopped on a call with him with Owen, one of our reps here, for those who are listening. And I was like, wait a minute, I know you. And here we are, 13, 14 years later. And it's crazy how the ecosystem's so tight and close knit. But it's honestly a pleasure to see you again, man. And thank you again for the time. Can't thank you enough.
Absolutely, man. This was fun. I'm happy to join the show again.
Cheers,
Perfect.
Man.
Love it. Have a good one. Thank you.
And